Welcome to Vets to PM's Military Transition Academy podcast, the show where we discuss how to succeed in transitioning from the military service to the civilian workforce. This show and the academy it represents helps veterans transition into meaningful, lucrative post-service careers. Your primary host is Eric Doc Wright, PhD, certified manager, military veteran, serial founder, best-selling business author, philosopher, linguist, and coach. Your other host is Jeremy Burdick, project management professional, scrum master, product owner, and retired Air Force chief, and the current COO of Vets to PM and the Professional Development Unit University, where we will interview veterans successful in corporate America and business to bring you nuggets of wisdom every episode to make you more successful. Next, let's introduce today's guest. Our special guest today is Jon Cobb. He's a Marine Corps combat veteran and entrepreneur. After more than 10 years of military and diplomatic security service, he joined the Deloitte Consulting Group, where he served as the project manager for a multi-billion-dollar modernization effort. He then founded the Tempest Group and now leads organizational transformations for some of the most admired companies around the world. He holds an MBA from Vanderbilt, an MTA from Harvard, and graduate certificates from both Harvard and Stanford. I think he's been to like 9 colleges. We'll talk about that. And then obviously he's a PMP certified guy, so project manager extraordinaire, and it's going to really come through with some of the power in his voice. So buckle up and get ready because this one's good.
You know, I'd have to say I totally agree with what you're saying about project management from the military, because there are so many moving pieces when you're handling international logistics and the tactical side and the troop welfare side and the training, all of that. You have to pull all of that together. And It is the perfect life experience, the on-the-job training to be a project manager. And you might not have the very detailed experience of working in, social media marketing or CPG operations or whatever it is. But when you have the perspective and the mindset to pull the pieces together, to spin all the plates, to check in with people, to know who you can trust, how to develop people as leaders and coaches and all of that, that's the hard thing, because so many people are focused on their individual skill set versus how to be a good leader and a good manager and keep all the trains running. So I totally agree with you there.
Jon, that's part of the whole conversation, right? So on LinkedIn, you hear all the time, Jon, I don't know if you ever hear this, and I'm living proof. I mean, I was a Navy welder. If I don't stand up straight, I drag knuckles and stuff, right? Like everything I learned how to do in the military, I use on the job as a project manager.
Sure.
I don't have to be able to spell IT. Some of the biggest projects I've ever done were IT projects. Why? The experts knew how to spell IT. All I need to know is, what do you need from this resources? What do you need from the stakeholders? How do I get that stuff for you? So, when people argue with me on LinkedIn or flat out say, just because you've worn a military uniform doesn't mean you could be a project manager. I love it when they say that stupid shit, because Jeremy and I have helped over 6,200 of our brothers and sisters go make $85,000 a year managing projects. I don't care what type of project you're managing. Do you have the knowledge, skills, abilities that Jon just mentioned? Can you develop others? Can you train and mentor others? Can you influence leadership decisions? Are you curious, and can you do analytical and problem solving stuff? So Jon, I mean, you went from the Marine Corps, dude, into project management, and you've worked for some big companies. Do you feel in a similar way? And tell us about some stuff that set you up for success that literally anecdotally counteracts people who say, just because you wore a uniform doesn't mean you project manage.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the culture is a little bit different in the business world. We could probably all agree on that. The context is a little different. Your mission might be a little different, but the fact that you're doing project management, you're keeping track of a dozen or 100 different things that are being done by different specialists, that is very, very transferable. And of course, you're not going to be an expert at everything. You might be a company commander and you've got people that are machine gunners, and you might have, tanks you're working with and all kinds of stuff. You've got engineers, but those are individual skill sets that of course you can't master, but you can master the art of leading people and putting all the pieces together. And that is something that people don't get much exposure to or experience with in their careers until they hit the management level. Yeah. And I started getting exposed to that when I was 17 years old. Went to boot camp when I was 18, but I was depped in for a while. And man, like you're a squad leader at 18 years old and you're trying to keep track of all these different moving pieces. And that is experience that sets you up for success as a manager in the military and later in the private world. So I couldn't agree more with what you're saying.
And, John, and so to caveat or to extend that argument, so I obviously am more well polished when I have these conversations with folks in public forums, but to lead into that is now, hey, the question really should be, I think, do you want to grow up and be a project manager in the civ div or the civilian workforce or not? That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
The reality is you're capable. The reality is you can make a good living until you figure out what the hell you want to do when you grow up, if it's not project management, right? And so finally, where I leave the argument is, hey, look, if the reality is this, I don't care if you work at Deloitte, I don't care if you work at Coca-Cola, I don't care if you work for a mom and pop startup down the street, you're going to be asked to be on a project. If you're military, you're probably going to be asked to lead it because they figure out real quick that you can lead people and manage things like budgets and resources and whatever, right? Sure. In austere environments even. So regardless of whether you want to be a project manager or not, if you're going to have an operational job, you still might as well have on your resume, hey, here's all the operational stuff I've done. And oh, by the way, here's some of the non-standard project work I've done. You can literally hire me for anything in your company and I can go work anywhere in operations and I'll do both standard and non-standard work because I'm a badass. I mean, shouldn't you at least get credit for what you've done?
Well, and to that point, I think being a project manager is really the art of doing big things and doing scalable things.
Love it.
So once you bridge the gap from being an individual contributor as a private or PFC or whatever to being an entry-level manager, that's a skill set that you're going to use and you're going to optimize for the rest of your life. And you could do it to lead a fire team of 4 or 5 people, or you can use it to lead a company of 5 or 50,000 people. It's the same skill set. You're just getting better at it. How do I replace myself? How do I develop the leaders under me? How do I make sure that things are getting done on time, on track, in a quality way? It's the same skill set. And once people realize that, it sets them up for success in the private sector world, in the business world, because it's going to feel very familiar in that way. You have to manage timelines, resources, people, and everything that you're working on and keep it all moving forward as quickly as you can in a quality way.
Yeah.
Same as the military.
Yeah. And the hiring managers will immediately recognize that you're doing it. In the civ div, they don't have a word for force multiplier, but they sure as hell know it when they see it. They're like, that John guy, oh my gosh, he's running circles around our project managers. I mean, so it's definitely a good skill set to at least articulate that you have. So John, tell us a little bit about, so we're talking about military service, but tell me about what it was like in the Corps, man. Where'd you serve? What'd you do? Like, and then what kind of Marine did you grow up and become, as far as now I'm a civilian and I'm killing it out here. Like, tell us about that transition a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. So signed my contract to join the Marine Corps when I was 17, went to boot camp at 18. I'd like to say I grew up in the Marine Corps and I joined 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines in good old 29 Palms. So the only place that's hotter and smells worse than Iraq, frankly, and trained up there. 3-4 was the most deployed unit to combat zones in the Middle East for most of OIF and OEF. And so the people that trained me were the ones that invaded Baghdad in 2003, pulled down the statue of Saddam, all of that. So they were hardcore dudes. And getting trained by them was an honor. Ended up deploying to Iraq twice, 2006, and then from 2007 to 2008. So, back to back, 29 Palms, Iraq, 29 Palms, Iraq. I was on a fire team for a while and then ended up joining the Scout Sniper Platoon. I was a team leader there for a little while and had some fantastic leaders and really learned a lot from them about how to take care of your people and be a good manager. How do you care about the mission and your team at the same time? And if you can balance those two things correctly, then you're going to be a great leader. There are sometimes when the mission takes priority and there are sometimes when your people really need to take priority. And you have to have the judgment and experience to figure that out. And that's going to make you a good leader wherever you are. And then after the Marine Corps, worked on a government contract for a while, ended up going back to the Middle East 6 more times. So about 8 times total, mostly to Iraq and a little time in Israel and Palestine.
And so for those of you that are listening, at the gym or on the drive or whatever, and you're not watching, John dressed up pretty nice, man. He looks pretty good in a sport coat, right? And you heard him say, I'm scout sniper teams. That's another thing we hear coming out of TAPS or wherever else we went is, oh, you stood a watch. Oh, you carried a sidearm? Cop, security guard, maybe EMT. You want to branch out. Now, look, man, I love our police officers and I love our EMTs, right? There's nobody I would rather have when shit hits the fan than those guys and gals. However, just because I stood a watch and just because I was qualified on all the sidearms and defense platforms that I was supposed to be qualified on doesn't mean that that's what I want to do for a living. Mm-hmm. So you put a sport coat on, you learn how to speak business. You heard John say it a couple of times. You learn how to speak management, the language of the CivDiv, which is not military leadership. You can go do great things, whether it's manage projects or manage people as an HR person or manage an office as an operations manager or whatever, right? So, John, what a cool example you are of like, hey, here's what I did, totally operational, pointy end of the spear type stuff.
Thank you.
And now I'm wearing a sport coat, not managing multi-million-dollar projects and working.
I appreciate that. You got to decide what you want to do and then just go after it and execute, and anything is possible. So I only had 2 years of high school, right? 2 years of high school. And then they said, hey, you've got to figure out how to graduate from high school to join the Marine Corps. So I found a way to do that, ended up graduating on time when I was 17, joined the Marine Corps. And then I decided I wanted to continue learning, go back to school. So I was in Baghdad, or I was in Al Anbar at the time, paper mailing my assignments back one at a time, doing classes, probably not making that much progress, doing like sniper missions at night, doing homework during the day, which was crazy, but I was making incremental progress toward my goals. And then when I got out, I went back to school and ended up finishing in 2013 my bachelor's degree, finished with a 4.0 there, but just making those small investments in the direction that you want to go and not knowing exactly where that was going to lead, but understanding that it was going to open up doors. And one step at a time, it led to working at Deloitte. I got to work on the $10 billion JEDI contract at the Pentagon, which was an awesome experience. Learned a lot about cloud services there. And then went on to start my own work. Got a contract with Microsoft, my first contract as an entrepreneur. So that was a fantastic opportunity. And now being able to see into all of these different companies and see the problems that they're having and realizing, man, if they only knew how much they could benefit from hiring veterans to solve these problems, because sometimes they don't have a clear mission. Sometimes they don't have people with the leadership experience, and hiring a veteran for those roles would make a night and day difference in these companies.
Amen, brother. What an absolute inspiration, John. All of you out there in MTA Podcast Nation, man, I hope you are digging what this guy is putting down. That's why we wanted him on the show, right? And so to talk about that a little bit too, think about some of the places you've served and the op tempo, right? Like dwell time my ass. Like, hey, I'm in the desert, then I'm back in the desert, and then I'm back in the desert. The only thing that was changing was where you stepped onto or off of the aircraft, right? I mean, so yeah. But your resiliency, your threshold for uncertainty, your threshold for stuff not going down the way the schedule said to. I mean, I've been outside of a conference room 29 minutes before a meeting with the CFO on a multi-dollar project. Everybody's losing their lunch about, oh my God, the color printer's out of ink and we're not going to have the slide deck for the boss and like whatever. It's like, whoa, everybody, take a breath. Are you getting shot at? Are you getting killed? No. Take a breath. Who's got a car? Where's the closest Walmart? Like, let's time hack that. Can we be back in 28 minutes? Like, just figure it out, man. And that's another skill, I think, that if you could talk that stuff up on your resume, your LinkedIn profile, your conversations with hiring managers about, hey, I can handle stuff.
And you know how to work hard.
But I handle your stuff. Go ahead, man.
Yeah. Who in the military hasn't worked 100+ hour weeks, for better or worse? So, working 45 or 50 hours is not a huge deal. And I think that sometimes veterans assume that people understand the value that we bring, and we really have to spell it out. I did a 2-week tour of Silicon Valley in 2020, and I was part of the Harvard Center for Public Leadership. And we went there to understand the veteran opportunities with tech companies in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. And I was at the coffee shop in Google where they have free coffee and everything, talking to people. And they said, so why are you here? And I said, well, I'm figuring out, what all these opportunities are for veterans here and trying to help businesses understand how they can benefit from having veterans work there. And somebody said to me, well, what makes you think that companies would benefit from having veterans? And it was disappointing because there's so much that people don't understand. And that's why I appreciate what you do so much, helping veterans and companies understand the value that we bring to the table, because there is a lot of missing structure. And veterans come in, they bring that structure, but they also bring true leadership, because when you've had people's lives in your hands, you care about them on a completely different level. And sometimes people perceive military to have this, this harsh, discipline-driven leadership style, like a dictatorship. And it's very much the opposite. When people's lives are in your hands, you learn to care about them. You're a family, you're downrange together. You've got to share food because you have limited food, or you've got to share water because there's limited water on a mission. I think we've all been there in some way. And if you can communicate that in your resume and your interviews, that you know how to be a true team player and take care of the team, but also get results, then you're a win-win in any company's book.
Oh man. And we're moving like a breakneck speed. I'm picking my jaw off the floor here while I'm listening to you two talk about this. And so I'm just going to catch up the crowd if they happen to miss it. We were talking about PM and how the military really prepares you for some of the duties, not every duty, maybe not the tools and techniques of everything. And you may not know every iota of project management as the art form, but the blocking and tackling, right? You can train your replacement. You do know how to build a high performing team to go get after whatever it is that project's objective was. And you can have multi-focus, right? And you've said this in so many words, but hyper focused on my team, but also focused on the objective at hand. And right. Just those two combined alone would probably get you pretty close to target, on top of all those other intangibles that you guys are talking about. And then you bring in, all the other experiences that you've had. So, I mean, how cool that you're taking time out to really unpack what made you successful, and the advocate for the military veteran. I don't know if we'll ever get corporate America fully educated, but if we can educate the individual to go be their own advocate and help them translate those words to the way you just put it. I mean, if I was sitting across from you at an interview table, I'd be like, the cat knows exactly what he's talking about when we're talking about planning and leadership and organizing and then controlling those assets. I mean, you're a manager all the way around. So, I mean, and it's in the words that you're using. So as people are listening to this, I just want you to pick up on, I know we're moving fast between, Doc and John. We got, two highly intelligent people, but for the slow cats like me in the room, I'm just trying to slow them down just a little bit, put a little drag on them, so the other people can keep up. But talk about this, some of this educational stuff that you've endured.
Yeah,
while,
endurance is a good word. Endurance is a good word. So I don't know if you know this, but I ended up going to 9 different colleges, and I knew where I wanted to go. Based on my Marine Corps work and my government work, I was supporting the State Department for some of their missions in Baghdad. Got to work with congressional delegations and seeing these strategic influencers who didn't necessarily understand the situation on the ground. And so I decided that I wanted to make the transition to having a very strategic impact while also listening to the people who were closest to the problems. And that's why I initially went back to school. So I finished my undergrad at Vanguard University in California. Then I was a police officer in California for a while. We could talk about that. But, that just reinforced my perspective that there were things I still had to learn, and there was strategic influence I wanted to have to fix things at a higher level. So from there, I went to Stanford. I did a graduate certificate in international security there. Love that program. And then did an MBA at Vanderbilt in Nashville. Went to a couple community colleges to rack up some extra classes, did a stats class at Berkeley, and I wasn't interested in the degrees necessarily, because not every class I took helped me get a degree. I was interested in what I was going to be able to learn and then apply to my work in a very practical way. And it just so happened that the classes I took and what I learned helped set me up for success at Deloitte and working with these other companies, and then starting my own company. But I did my PMP certification through the Project Management Institute in 2017 during my MBA program. And that was an awesome combination to have, like the PMP perspective and the MBA. There's a little bit of overlap, but together it's a powerful combination.
You know, and John, I mean, so I knew this, but I was waiting for you to take us there, and you did. You're a smart cat. But so listen to what John said. I mean, right? So like Marine Corps, 17, you know, multiple degrees over decades. I mean, it took me 20 plus years to finish, to go from the college kid that left as a 17-year-old kid and swore to my mom, who was a university professor, PhD at the time, I was never going to college. 6 months later, my ass would be in boot camp. To a year and a half later, I would be downrange in the first Persian Gulf. So I just dated myself, right? And 28 years later, she would be there and both of us would have water in our eyes when I pinned on PhD. Do you know what I mean?
That's
like
cool.
Life has a way of serving you up some crow, man. And it's usually pretty cold, right? But
yeah,
my point is, you know, so John's saying, hey, I had all the skills and abilities to do something meaningful, lucrative. Yeah, maybe I'm not staying at the project management town at the train station. I'll get back on in a couple of years and I'll go do my own thing. But you heard John say he got out of the Corps, he got the civilian language, he got the civilian chops, he got some industry knowledge, and then he said, hey, I bet I can make a difference. I bet I can serve these customers better than they're being served now. And now he's running his own gig. So, you know, the scary part is for y'all listening, there's no detailer or career field manager sitting in Washington going to tell you what to be or do. But the empowering part of that realization is there's nobody telling you what to be or do. You get to be it or do it, like whatever you want to be or do. John, tell us a little bit about being a business guy now, dude.
Man, well, I think you nailed it. You know, the scariest thing I ever heard is that you can do whatever you want. And it was also the most exciting thing. Like, I remember graduating from boot camp and deciding when I got to go to bed, which just blew my mind, having that kind of freedom. I think that's what it's like when you EAS and you get out and you realize you can do whatever you want to, and nobody's going to force you to do anything you don't want to. So you better figure out what you want to do, or you're going to take whatever's left over. So business world, you know, I was lucky in some ways that I got to work with the Pentagon and with the Marine Corps early on in my business career. So that was a bit of a gentle transition. But it's exciting to do big things. It's exciting to change people's lives. So I am not interested in projects that are going to make a ton of money. That's not my main focus. Of course, I want businesses to be successful, but I do a lot of organizational transformation work because I'm helping the people inside of those companies be more successful. How do we support them better? How do we help them hire the right people? They're going to do well in those roles, things like that. And so I've kind of found my niche as someone who is helping these companies, but really helping the individual people on the ground, because that goes back to what I care about, helping the people from my time in the Marine Corps. So that's been great. And, you know, the sky's the limit. I mean, depending on how good you are at managing, being a project manager, you can move into international things. You can manage $1 million budgets. You can manage $1 billion budgets and start your own business. So I work with a group of freelance management consultants, and we have projects that come to us and they put together a tailored team for whatever they need. And it's pretty cool working with some of the biggest companies in the world to help them, you know, solve problems that maybe they've been facing for 20 years, or with the pandemic, you know, helping a Fortune 50 company learn how to work hybridly, or help the company understand the benefits of letting their people work remotely. That's a big win-win for the company and for the people in that company. So it's been a good ride.
And let me ask you this, John. So based on your insight, bud, have you found, are the problems and the challenges tactically, daily, weekly, operationally, strategically, are they super different for a fire team or a platoon or a United States Marine Corps than the same stuff you see at Lockheed Martin or Booz Allen Hamilton or mom and pop shop on the corner? Yeah. I mean, is that?
It's the same. And the more organizations I work with, because I get to walk through walls and I work for one tech company, and then I worked for their competitor. So it's really cool to get the behind the scenes view on how they're facing some of the same problems. But it comes down to commander's intent. And if you don't have clear commander's intent, then you're probably not going to be successful. You could build something great, but if it's not what the commander wants, if it's not what the CEO wants, then it's probably a waste of time. So get the commander's intent. From there, set up your strategic objectives. What are your objectives? And I work with companies and teams that are not clear on their objectives, and they will not be successful until they clarify them. Then you start to measure things, and you can measure, how much progress you're making toward each of those objectives. And just having that mindset from the military, from the Marine Corps, that you have to understand what the intent is and what the objectives are before you set out on your mission, so to speak, know where you're going. And that's critical for teams. And I think that comes second nature to people from the military. It's ingrained in us. It's not second nature for people that are working from companies that are asking, what do we have? What do we need to do? Instead of having the end in sight and backward planning, you got to look at the top of the mountain and be like, that's where we're going. How do we get there? Instead of wondering what's right in front of you. So that perspective is invaluable.
Yeah, so neat that you were like the invisible man and you got to see so many different perspectives. And it really boiled down to, adapt and overcome for the team, but vision, strategic guidance, strategic influence for the leaders. So, if it didn't start with the clarity of, hey team, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. And I'm going to remind you every day until we get there. Then it kind of fails, because by time it's the telephone game, it gets down to the people who are actually doing it. They're not rowing the boat in the same direction. They're trying to all do their own little processes. And I love what you said. And just in case anybody missed, like you're solving big problems, and making big changes as a project management. That's really what you're doing, is you're spinning a bunch of plates, but you're herding the cats, for a military word, right? You're herding all the cats, getting them all in the right spot, doing the right thing at the right time. And if you can figure that part out, it's just magical. And we see it all the time in the military, because you never go into a unit and a commander doesn't have his, mission statement or the vision or the policy clearly stated. And then you rarely go into a combat ops without at least having some kind of a tasking order where you know what you're supposed to go do. So that, just taking those skills, I never really thought about it till you said it out loud. Just taking those hard skills right there and translating them into the business world would pay dividends. It's just going to prepare you.
Yeah. And another thing I see is that there's so much complexity. And anyone who's been in the military in a very complex environment understands the importance of simplicity. Keep it simple, right? So if I can't explain it to a crayon-eating Marine, or if I don't understand it as a crayon-eating Marine myself, then other people are probably not going to understand it. And so taking these very complex things and breaking them down into very simple, crystal clear communication, writing it down, is super valuable. And it's counterintuitive, because a lot of people want to impress each other with the big words they use, or, how long they can write, or whatever it is. But finding that clarity and the simplicity is something that the military taught me, and that has been, a night and day difference in my career in the business world. Keep it simple.
Yeah, one of the things we do at Vested PM, right? So we're all involved. We all know the planning and decision-making criteria. We use MCDAs for all my project managers out there listening. Multi-criteria decision analysis tables. Everybody knows the decisions. Hey, if I'm going to pitch the boss, or I'm going to pitch Jeremy, or I'm going to pitch Kathy, the first thing they're going to ask me is this, and then they're going to ask me this, and then they're going to ask me this series of 8 questions, and I better have good answers for all of them, or the answers, hell no, come back when you have answers to my 8 questions. The second thing too is, once we get through the 8 questions and we're like, okay, kind of sounds like you have intent, Commander. How do the rest of us execute on that? We kind of step back and say, okay, everybody recap for Doc. Let's make this Napoleon's corporal easy. Doc, tell us what you think you heard, dude. And then they let me say it back to him. And if I don't understand it, they're like, because if he doesn't understand it, the dude's gonna bother us with questions from now until the cows come home. So let's just make sure he's square just before we even leave the room, right? And then, like you said, everybody understands what we're doing. So while stuff is going to get complex and stuff's going to be uncertain and stuff's going to start to break, right? Because reality is going to slam into your plan at the first intersection. When it goes sideways, you're like, oh, we kind of expected it to go sideways. We just didn't know it would look like that. Okay, here's where we're trying to go. Let's get back on vector, right?
Absolutely. And, if you've got a backup plan, that's something that sometimes people that don't have a military background don't understand. What's plan B? What's plan C? You talked earlier about nobody shooting at you. And so what I learned is I kept my cool when things were falling apart for other people, but I almost had to really meet them where they were. So for example, I went into this meeting once and we had this projection. Somebody made a typo on the spreadsheet. It was $300 million off. And we're about to walk into this meeting with a pretty senior stakeholder. And people started flipping out, right? We don't have a printer, we're on site. And I had to calm the situation down. And we just took that projection out and told them, hey, we're going to have this to you next week. We're still working on it. So what's the backup plan? If we can't get there this way, we're going to get there that way. We're going to find an alternative. And that situation was resolved by just slowing down and thinking about what different approach we could take. So I see that all the time, but if you are too calm, then people think that you're not taking it seriously, and you got to be careful to acknowledge the crisis and to talk them through it in a way that they appreciate, instead of telling them, it's fine, nobody's shooting at you, it's not a big deal.
That's right. Super insightful. Yeah.
Thank you. Good advice. Good advice for sure, because you will get that. A lot of times I get it too is, dude, how do you stay so calm all the time? Well, I'm not up here in my head. I'm not as calm as I look to you. But I'm dealing with it internally, but I'm also going through all the experience buckets that I've seen this problem before. I applied this technique. That didn't work. So it's like these yes, no gates. You can't see inside my head, but it's like a decision tree. Yes, no, that didn't work. This worked. But I'm going through the years and years of reporting into the boss. Oh man, this didn't work. Oh, that wasn't the right thing to say. Baffle you with BS. Nope, that's not a good option. Executives sniff that out real quick, like a bloodhound, for sure. So for anybody listen, don't try to baffle them with BS, right? Just do exactly what Jon did. We don't have that answer for you right now. We will get back to you, and then get back to them. That's a perfectly acceptable solution at any level of the game. So, wow, really cool. Good.
Like a duck, you're paddling your ass off under the water line, but above the water line, it looks like you're just cruising.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, I think of it as a war game. You're constantly war gaming. You're running different scenarios in your mind. What if this doesn't work? What if that doesn't work? Because when you have the experience of things not working out, then you know that you need to have a backup plan. You don't want to be caught flat-footed. And that's going to help you be really successful in any corporate world. Have a backup plan, because things are not going to go the way that you want them to all the time.
That's right.
Jon, and that's so insightful too, man, because think about this again, gang. The employers may not even be able to articulate what makes you a different type of cat than the other types, but they'll know it when they see it. If Jon's always got some empathy going on, but he's maintaining his cool, but he's got a backup plan when shit goes south, and it's going to be okay when we're done. Like, they'll start to think to themselves, wait a minute. I realize I don't see very many others, if any, doing that stuff. He must be really good at this. And you start to get their confidence, you start to get their trust. And what is trust built on? Jon says he'll do something. You expect him to do it. He does it.
Yeah.
You try him out and make him do it again. He does it again. It's like, oh, I trust him to do what he says he'll do. And then when it does go sideways, the first person they come looking for is, hey, Jon, dude, it's going sideways. We could use a little help here. Could you do that backup planning thing that you do sometimes? You know what I mean?
Like, reputation to have.
Yeah. They start to go to you as the go-to guy or gal, because you just do business different than everybody else, and they trust you.
Yeah, and I think the question for a lot of veterans is, how do I prove that in an interview? Because an interview is really a confidence test. How confident can you make that hiring manager or that recruiter feel about your ability to add value on day one? And veterans are fast learners. You have to become an expert at becoming an expert quickly when you're thrown into a new role that you've never done before, and it's like, figure it out. So I know that vets learn quickly, but what companies are looking for a lot of times is somebody that can pick up the ball on day one, because they've waited too long to hire somebody in the first place. Now they're in crisis mode. We need someone who can operate day one. And you want to give them that confidence that you're going to do well immediately. And talking about your experience, showing up early for the interview, talking about how you've managed complex teams in the past, all of that's going to work really well for you. You know, speak the language of business, maybe leave some of the military jargon out of it, but really it's a confidence test. How well can you convince that person you're interviewing with that you can do the job right away? And there might be some context that you need to pick up for that organization or that industry, but you understand the principles of management. That is critical.
Golly, that's good, man. That is good. I mean, when you think about it, it's a confidence test. You boil it down to, that's all it really is. It's your chance to wow them with your ability to apply value to them as quickly as possible. Like, when will I get my return on my time for this interview from this person? And in their mind, if it's day one, conversation's over. Let's move to, okay, now we're negotiating. Are you a good fit for the company? Now, how do we get you onboarded? And when can you start? You know, because we didn't have a backup plan like Jon did on the last project.
You know, and how insightful is that, right? It's not a confidence test for you, interviewer. I mean, that's where I think Jon really put this on its head. It's a confidence test for the person across the desk. They got a problem. They're getting their lunch eaten by alligators in their boat, like right now. How are you going to help them tomorrow, the day after I hire you? The second thing I think that Jon said was really nuanced is, if you're focused on how you're going to add value to them, it ain't about you. You don't talk about you and what you want to do when you grow up and blah, 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 because they don't care. You talk about, hey, look, if you guys are like other companies, and I've done my research, you guys have this project going, it's kind of looking sideways. Here's some things I've done in the past that worked on a complex project situation that I experienced that was similar. You start talking to them and they see value about, hey, Jon can help me.
Great point.
Now they care about what you have to say because it's about them. It's not about you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Actually, I have read the research on talking about examples of your experience. And a lot of people say, well, this is what I would do hypothetically. That is much less convincing and statistically much less relevant than someone saying, well, I faced this decision before, and this is what I did. This is how I handled the situation. I pulled these people in, I talked to them, I put a plan together, I held these people accountable. Here are the KPIs. So talk about what you've done, and please have those stories ready before you go into the interview. Practice your stories, know how to tell them, know what questions they might ask, and have your plan for the interview just like you would for any project or any mission.
Yeah, that's Jon, great. Do you need 97 stories, brother? Or could you just have a couple that you can go back to that well and talk about those stories?
If you have half a dozen great stories, that is plenty. Just know how to tell them. Some of them will apply for different things. So you might have a story that works well if somebody asks you, tell me about a difficult situation you faced. That might be the same story that you tell if somebody says, tell me how you managed a team member that was not performing, or something like that. How did you go above and beyond for your team? All of those can be answered with different twists on the same story. But know your stories and be ready to tell them in a very sincere way. Follow the STAR method, situation, task, action, result, and be crystal clear about what you contributed and how it made an impact. A lot of people talk about what they were responsible for. I see this a lot on veteran resumes. They'll say, I was responsible for $50 million worth of equipment and responsible for 200 people or 500 people, whatever it is. I don't care about that as much as an interviewer as what you actually added to the situation. What was your impact? Yeah, and you can talk about how you contributed value above and beyond. That's going to win people over and be very memorable.
Yeah, for everybody out there listening, I mean, STAR, right? And stories. So have your STAR stories ready to roll at your interview. And then, Jon, if there's one other thing I don't know, this isn't an interview class or anything, but it just sounds like you're very adept at dealing with and putting your mindset into it. What one other thing would you suggest a transitioning veteran do during that interview to solidify in the hiring manager's mind that they're the right person for the position that they're going for?
Yeah, great question. First of all, have some really good questions ready. Make them specific. Hey, I was reading about your company on this news site yesterday, or on your website yesterday, and there's this big initiative coming out, on the East Coast, or a government contract, or whatever it is. How is that impacting your work? How would that impact the work that I do? Ask those questions that show that you've done your homework. That's really valuable. Don't ask about your salary. Don't ask about, where you're going to be located or anything like that. Make it about how you can add value to them. And one more question that I just heard that I loved, had a candidate that I was working with ask this question in an interview, and the recruiter called me afterward and said he was so impressed. This candidate said, look, I want to prove to you that I'm serious about this job. I want to show you what I can do. Give me a job. What can I do following this interview to demonstrate my skill set? And that interview was blown away. That interviewer was blown away by the fact that they were willing to go out of their way, go above and beyond, and take the initiative to ask for work when they hadn't even gotten an offer yet. So I think, you find a unique way to show that you are somebody that takes initiative and that you're going to put in the extra work and go the extra mile. That was a great question.
Oh man, for sure. What great advice. I mean, I hope everybody caught that. Man. So Doc, as we start to round this out, what other questions you have for Jon that would help a transitioning vet?
Well, and to piggyback on Jon's story. So, I was sitting with an executive at dinner one night, and I said, what biggest piece of advice do you give interviewers? And you probably want to give it to them beforehand, but you don't see them before you do the interview. So what can I tell them? If they're going to come interview with you, you're an exec, I don't want to waste your time. What do I tell them? And he said, look, to Jon's point, bring some questions. Ask me a couple well thought out questions. I said, tell me a little bit more about that. He said, well thought out. I don't need 24. Ask me 2 or 3 questions that demonstrate, to Jon's point, that you've done your homework. And I said, yeah, but let's say you're the 6th interview. Like, do I have to have 12, 15, 18 good questions? He said, look, man, I wasn't in the prior 5 interviews. I don't care what you asked me, and I don't care what the other people said. You're asking me a well thought out question, and you're letting me give you my answer. I'm an executive. I have a different perspective than they do. So I don't care if the other 5 people have given you answers to the same 3 questions. Ask me some good, solid questions. Let me give my answers. So again, to Jon's point, have a couple stories. You don't need 97 stories. Keep it simple. This is not, you don't need to make this super complex. Have a couple good questions. Just recycle them in the interviews, right? And then the other thing I would ask Jon is, you obviously are a well-read cat, right? You learn how to read, and you learn how to read fast when you're doing all that research to get these post-bachelor degrees. So what 1 or 2 books or really inspirational TEDx talks or whatever would you say to somebody like, hey, you having trouble imagining going from Marine to project manager to business owner someday working with Fortune 50 defense contractors? Here's what a guy who's done that would tell you.
Thanks for asking. That's a great question. One of my favorite videos is Les Brown speaking. It's a speech on YouTube called It's Possible. If you haven't listened to that, it's old. It's from like the 80s, but man, such a great speech. I got to do a training with Les Brown back in February. It was fantastic. So he's someone I really follow, and I highly recommend that. I'm into biographies right now, and I've kind of moved away from business books to biographies because those are the very real story of how people did it, and when you see somebody like Alexander Hamilton and you read their story about how they came to the US with nothing, and then he risked everything in the military and rose to be one of the most powerful people in the history of the US, if not the world. What a phenomenal story. So find those people that inspire you, read their biographies, read their stories, and realize that they weren't great when they started. This is a Les Brown quote, actually. He says, you don't have to be great to get started. You've got to get started to be great. And if you can do that, just start wherever you are, start working toward whatever your goal is. Be crystal clear on your commander's intent for your life, so to speak, what your goal is, and then start executing, and you're going to get there eventually. But book-wise, I'd have to say Alexander Hamilton was life-changing. You know, anything by Ron Chernow is fantastic. Maybe not the business book answer that you usually get, but those are real stories. And then going back to the interview questions, you know, you can always ask about that interviewer too. And if, let's say you look at their LinkedIn, they've been with the company for 15 years, you can say, what has made you decide to stay with this company for so long? And they can talk about what they love about the company. Or, you know, I see you've been promoted 5 times in 5 years. What has helped you be so successful? And frankly, from a psychology perspective, when you get people to talk about things they like, they're going to project that positivity onto you as an interviewer. So there are all these techniques that you can use. You don't want to be insincere about it. You know, I think they're great questions, but you want to be very sincere. And that's the biggest thing I tell people going into an interview. It's just a conversation. Yes, it's a formal conversation. You've got a lot riding on the line, but bottom line is you are having a real conversation with another human being, and it's not a stress test. Companies are not trying to, you know, trick you and ask you trick questions. So just be yourself, be natural, be sincere, tell your stories, and prove to them why you are a great choice.
Wow. Wow. I mean, so much there. Really enjoyed having you on, Jon.
Thank you very much.
Any parting shots as we wrap this up?
You know, I think the PMP is a fantastic route. It doesn't take that long to get. You can read the study guide, PMP exam simplified, or your book, you know, is fantastic. And that's going to help you get that PMP certification, which is going to open a lot of doors for you, especially with government contracts. So many of them require a PMP certification in order to get a certain job. So go that route. And if you like it, maybe go the MBA route. But PMP is a very valuable certification to have, and a great ROI for the time that you put into it. And then, you know, last thing I'd say is I'm working on an app right now that's coming out soon called the Job Search Bootcamp. This is a step-by-step guide to help veterans and really anybody looking for work to land better jobs faster. So whatever has been holding you back, I talk to people that have applied to hundreds of jobs and they're not making progress. And I work with them. We fix 1 or 2 things: the way they tell their story, the way they tell, you know, they craft their resume. You fix those little things and they get hired almost immediately. And so this step-by-step audio program, it's got exercises at the end of every chapter to help people think through what their strengths are, what they need to work on, how to tell their stories. And by the time you finish that program, you're going to have an MBA level understanding of the job search process, whether you're looking for, you know, a job as a welder or something like that, or a mechanic, or you're looking for an MBA job. This is going to help you get to that next level. So that's called the Job Search Bootcamp, coming out on iOS and Android in the next few weeks. And check it out if you're interested.
Wow. Too cool. Too cool. And by the time this airs, it's probably out. So jobs.
It'll probably be out there. Yep.
Perfect. Doc, Mike, over to you, and we'll wrap it up.
Burdick, I got nothing. Dude left me speechless, man. What a home run show, Jon. And
thank you very much.
We'll be looking forward for the app, dude. When it comes out, we'll broadcast to the network. So let us know. And Jeremy, as always, man, what a great show you've produced. So thanks for letting me tag along there, Johnny Bravo.
Thank you very much. Great being on here, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for tuning in and spending a bit of time with us at the Military Transition Academy, powered by Vets to PM. If we piqued your interest, but you want more details, please head over to the website vets2pm.com and see if we can help prepare you for a better tomorrow or a future meaningful and lucrative career.